Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo, and I'm smiling because today's a very, very special day for me and for the Transparency Task Force because today we are 10 years old. And being very, very frank with you, the first thought that crosses my mind about the fact that we are 10 years old is the simple reality that we've managed to survive for this long. An idea that was developed between myself and Con Keating and Dr. Chris Sear and folks like Henry Tapper, who's here tonight, the idea of encouraging the financial sector to be more transparent, more truthful, and more trustworthy was the idea that got the TTF going. And on the 6th of May, 2015, 10 years ago today, obviously, we held our very first ever meeting. It was at Senate House in London University, and it was a gathering of various folk from inside the financial services sector, people who I would describe as being progressively minded, people who liked the idea of change, liked the idea of the sector becoming more transparent, more truthful, and more trustworthy, people who liked the idea of working together. And we met and we talked about ideas, about the importance of transparency, about the importance of the industry serving society rather than capitalizing on it or even exploiting it. And the meeting went very well. We had another one a few days later for those who couldn't make the first one. And on the 7th of October 2015, a few months later, we held our first ever transparency symposium, as we used to call our event. And like much of the beginnings of Transparency Task Force, the event and the dialogue and the interaction and the conversations were largely about financial services people, either working for product manufacturers or distributors or consultancies or trade bodies, but people connected to the financial sector, sharing thoughts and ideas about what could be done to make it a better industry, better serving part of our ecosystem. But a great deal has changed since then. And part of tonight's conversation is going to be talking about those changes, talking about the key learnings, reflecting, of course, but perhaps most importantly, thinking about the future. Could and should Transparency Task Force evolve from here onwards such that we have the greatest possibility to make a meaningful difference? I'm going to use some slides. I will be circulating the slides. I've very deliberately written the slides so that anybody looking at them can make sense of them even without the dialogue. So I'm not going to be going through them word for word. Of course, you'll be pleased to hear. I'm just going to be using the slides to draw out a few key points here and there. So please do get yourselves ready for quite a bit of content. But as quickly as possible, I'll get to the point where we can start talking through some ideas and having what I hope will be a constructive conversation amongst us. But that's the headline, folks. As you can see, TTF turns 10. Quite an achievement. In all honesty, just surviving for this length of time has been quite an achievement, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster. Main aims: to revisit our initial purpose, to reflect on key developments, to contemplate the future, and to seek your input on a number of important fronts. Now, later on in the session, folks, I'll be holding a conversation with you about what you perceive our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to be. This is an absolutely brilliant chance for me to get your thoughts collectively about how you see Transparency Task Force, particularly from the perspective of what are we good at, what are we bad at, i.e. strengths, weaknesses, what do you see as our opportunities, and what do you see as our strengths? Could I please invite you to grab a pen and paper or something you can write on, a pad, a phone note page, whatever your preference is. And during the course of the conversation, during the course of the event, can I please invite you to actively think about what you believe are strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to be? Because in the latter part of the event, we're going to be going through each of those topics. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? And I'll be inviting you to verbalize some of those thoughts or put comments in the chat to hopefully bring to the surface some thinking that might inform how we move forward from here. The next 10 years of TTF, as it were. Okay, so that's a very, very important thing to do, please. Think about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Folks, I'm big enough and ugly enough and old enough and experienced enough to be able to take constructive criticism. So please don't hesitate to tell it as you see it. So long as it's delivered in a reasonably civilized way, it shouldn't be too problematic for me. So feel free to speak honestly about how you see our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Another way in which you can help is to, if you haven't already done so, deal with the questionnaire that we've created. There's a very, very simple questionnaire called the What Do You Think About TTF survey. As you can see, three very short and easy questions. It's a 3-4 minute job to complete it. It really is very easy. I'm going to put the link to the survey in the chat, so you can obviously be completing it as we go if you would like to do that. And let me just get this link up and running. Here it is. As I say, it's about to go in the chat, and complete it. Please do if you haven't already done so. There's that one. The second item you might want to complete, which does take a bit longer, you can complete this during the meeting if you want to, or afterwards if you don't. What you're looking at the screen there is the very short TTF survey, just 3 minutes. But the next one is a bigger exercise. This is the Make Your Voice Heard questionnaire to gather public opinions on the Financial Conduct Authority. The FCA is no doubt going to come up quite a bit tonight because, for reasons I'll explain, the FCA occupies a significant part of our energy, timetable, resource, bandwidth, call it what you will. The FCA is of enormous interest to us. And when I say us, I mean both Transparency Task Force itself and also the All-Party Parliamentary Group we are proudly the Secretariat to. That's the APPG on Investment, Fraud and Fairer Financial Services. Now, as it says, please complete this questionnaire if you want to make your thoughts on the FCA public knowledge as part of the APPG's work into the regulator. And most of you will know that the APPG has been hyper-focused on the FCA for a few years, and in November published a very detailed report of the FCA. We'll be coming back to that point shortly. I'm also going to put into the chat something that you can take a look at and hopefully will find very, very interesting indeed. And allow me to tell you where to go to get to this. So again, I'm going to... What you're looking at here, folks, is the APPG report that was published in March. As you can see, like the previous report the APPG published, it was dedicated to Ian Davis, one of our volunteers who sadly passed away, took his life a couple of years ago. So there's the reference to Ian Davis, rest in peace. This report published on the 25th of March was the APPG's supplementary report about the FCA. And it's well worth taking a look at if you haven't already done so. If you go to the document, and again, I'll put the link to it in the chat, so you can come back to it later if you want to, or even glance through it as we're having tonight's conversation. There's the link in the chat already. If you open it up, and if you go to page number 91, which, as you can see, is overall conclusions and suggested next steps. To get to it, you just click on that link there and it'll take you straight to that section. At the back end of that little section about overall conclusions and suggested next steps, there are two links, two hyperlinks, they both relate to the survey that I've just asked you to complete. So if you click on where it says here, you'll get to the survey, the APPG survey. I know some of you have already done that. And if you click on this link, you'll get to a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet will download on your device. And when the spreadsheet downloads on your device, you will see it. And it will look like the spreadsheet that I hope is about to open up on my screen. Can you see a spreadsheet, folks? Yeah, I can see Philip Meadowcroft nodding his head. So this is the output. Very simply, what happens is you complete the survey, you click submit, it goes into a Google Doc, and every few days, Alexandra updates the link I just showed you with the latest iteration of the survey. And we did not have a clue how many people would complete it, but to cut a long story short, we now have over 1,000 people who have completed this survey, all about the FCA. And from all kinds of investment scam issues, Football Index, Woodford, Safe Hands, Blackmore Bond, etc., etc. And as the survey explains, the respondents put their information into the survey. It ends up in the spreadsheet. Alexandra updates the web page, and you can all download it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm about to download into the chat the spreadsheet. So again, either during the course of the session, if you want to, or afterwards, you can access the spreadsheet I'm about to put in the chat. I highly recommend you click on it now, even if you don't want to look at it now, because once you've clicked on it, it's on your computer or laptop or whatever you're using. Whereas if the event closes, you won't be able to get back into it. So I do recommend you do that. And if you do take a look at it, either now or later, you'll see that there are some very interesting themes coming through loud and clear about people's thoughts about the Financial Conduct Authority. So that's what that's all about. So just to recap, there are 3 things you can be actively doing during the event if you want to, as well as listening to me talking about what I'm talking about. The first, just to recap, is please give some active thought to our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. As I explained earlier, I'm just trying to share my screen again. Here we go. I think you can see my screen now. Yep. Please do give some thought to our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, because that's going to be our conversation point for later. Please do complete the very short TTF survey, and please complete the longer FCA survey. Of course, if you haven't already done it, then no need to do it again. Okay, I'm going to move on. So a little bit about the Transparency Task Force, just to kind of get everybody on the same page before we get into a bit more detail. We are a certified social enterprise. So some of you know I talk about Operation Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is the Greek word describing, amongst other things, the concept of change, and it's often applied in relation to the life cycle of a caterpillar turning into a chrysalis, turning into a butterfly. For the first 5 years of Transparency Task Force, we were just a company. That I liken to the caterpillar stage of TTF's evolution. For the next 5 years, we were and have been a certified social enterprise, which I liken to be the chrysalis stage of our development. And our plans for the future, as many of you will already know, are about the idea of Transparency Task Force evolving into a charity. And there's work going on behind the scenes with regard to that. Lots of questions. Do we become a charity? Do we set up a charity as a separate entity? What does the charity do? What would its charitable purpose be? What are its trustees? So who are its trustees? So on, so forth. But here now today, we are a certified social enterprise with a formal mission statement to promote reform of the financial sector so it serves society better. That is our formal remit, our manifesto, if you like. That's what you find if you look for us on Companies House, etc. We do have a strategy for driving change. It's been working. It's what we do. And our strategy for driving change is to bring together the thinking of two groups of people, those who have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, and those with the power and position to make that change happen. We've got various guiding principles. Perhaps the strongest, perhaps the most significant is the phrase sunlight is the best disinfectant, a phrase first used in 1914 in the book by Justice Louis Brandeis, the American. He wrote about sunlight as the best disinfectant in his book called Other People's Money and How the Bankers Use It. It's an old book. It's remarkable how much of it is actually still relevant today. So a guiding principle, if you like, a piece of our philosophy that underpins all of our work. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And that begs the question, well, what is it that needs disinfecting? Until Violation Tracker was around, we would talk without access to data. Today, of course, because of Violation Tracker, and most of you know we were heavily involved in the creation of Violation Tracker UK. We don't make it, but we were involved in conceiving the idea of Violation Tracker UK and getting it to happen. Because of Violation Tracker in UK, we can now access data. And when you get the slides, you can click on the link and you can go to the page, which shows that the financial sector is the most violating of all industries in the UK economy by a very, very long way. Not only does the data show that financial services misbehaves a great deal, more than any other industry by a long, long way, it also shows a disturbing pattern, a pattern of recidivism. In other words, organizations doing wrong, getting caught for doing wrong, being punished by way of fines for doing wrong, and then doing it all over again and again and again. And that pattern, that recidivist pattern, is what gives us, amongst other things, grave concern about whether the regulatory framework is working as it is meant to. Because if the main purpose of regulating is to change conduct in the market, it's clearly not working. It's clearly not working if it's not actually changing behavior in the market. Interesting stuff. I hope you think. There is a long list of issues that concern us. The slides, as I've said, have been deliberately constructed so that you've got a lot of detail there. I won't be going into much detail. I'm just going to be sharing with you some of the headline points here. Amongst the long list of issues that concern us, one of them, a very important one, is the distorted purpose of the financial industry. My own thoughts around this evolved as a consequence of hearing David Pitt Watson speak on this topic, the purpose of financial services, years and years and years ago. And what David Pitt Watson, who I'm very proud to say is a long-standing member of Transparency Task Force's advisory group, what David Pitt Watson helped me and others to understand is that there's been a distortion over time about what the financial industry is all about. What is its true purpose? It was originally established as a means to provide insurances, particularly in Scotland, as it happens. If you look at the history of the evolution of the financial sector, a lot of it came down to Scottish people making insurance provision in the event of a breadwinner dying. In other words, serving society, fulfilling a real purpose. Today, however, much of the financial industry is not much more than really complicated ways of moving money around. And every time it moves, somebody somewhere makes some money off the back of it. And very often, the money being made by somebody making that money is being made at the expense of somebody else. I'm oversimplifying to the nth degree, but I'm making the point that there's been a bit of a disconnect between the purpose of the finance industry as it was and what it is now. To my mind, it seems now to be riddled with all kinds of ways to make a quick buck without necessarily serving society. If you're cynical, you might even think it exploits society. Another great big problem is the asymmetry of power. What we mean by this is the consumer is very much David, the industry is very much Goliath. There's an enormous asymmetry of power. In and of itself, that's not a problem. But where it does become a problem is when things go wrong, because the enormous lobbying capabilities of the financial sector mean that vested interests are at work, which means that when things do get wrong, it's really difficult for ordinary members of the public to actually get justice and get redress. So the asymmetry of power is something we are very, very focused on. Another big issue, I'm listing concerns, obviously, another big issue is the woeful lack of transparency, scrutiny, and accountability. About a year ago, there was a very good article in the Civil Service Gazette about the way that independent bodies and bodies that were arm's length of the government, bodies like the post office, for example, had become self-controlling to the point that they were really devoid of any real accountability. It's a great article. I'll try to remember to circulate it afterwards. And the reason I mention that article is that it was written in response to the post office scandal. We're all familiar with that. And it makes the point brilliantly that when the government creates an arm's length body and creates an independent body, it's very tempting and very easy for that government to leave that entity to get on and do what it has to do without sufficient transparency, scrutiny, and accountability. And the point we make on this slide is very, very simply that if you have an organization with a huge amount of power, like the Financial Conduct Authority or indeed the Post Office, without sufficient levels of transparency, scrutiny, and accountability, there is a tendency for organizations like that to go rogue, either a little bit or a lot. The Post Office went seriously rogue, as we all know. Some people would say that the Financial Conduct Authority has gone exactly the same way due to a lack of transparency, scrutiny, and accountability. And that's a systemic issue. That's a structural flaw. How do you put that right? That's a question we'll be coming back to later. The deregulatory agenda. This topic came up in a meeting earlier today with the advisory group. There is a worldwide force called neoliberalism that, amongst other things, wants to promote free markets, a deregulatory agenda. I'm not in any way, shape, or form anti-capitalist. I'm not anti-growth. I'm not anything like that whatsoever. And I absolutely see the merit in getting rid of red tape, bureaucracy, and friction from the system. Why wouldn't you do that? You wouldn't get in the way of it. It's a good thing to do. However, if there's some kind of ideology at work that's leading to a growth agenda or a competitiveness agenda, and we all know that the FCA now has growth and competitiveness as a secondary objective, if there's an ideology at work there, then is the subtext really about getting in the way of things that slow down businesses making profit? And some people do buy into that. I personally think there's a huge amount of evidence suggesting that that is the case. And if there is a deregulatory agenda, is it going to come at the expense of consumers? Again, going back to this afternoon's conversation with the advisory group, if you look at what's going on with the Financial Ombudsman Service right now, you may well ask yourself whether consumer protections and specifically the mechanisms consumers get to get justice and redress when things go wrong. Some people believe, many people believe, that that deregulatory agenda is jeopardizing consumer protections. In effect, winding back decades worth of hard-earned progress and evolution of the system. So that's a real concern. That's a huge concern. It's a huge concern when, for example, as we understand it to be, joining up the dots, when the chief executive of the Competition and Markets Authority was in effect asked, what are you going to do to help the government's growth agenda? We imagine his response is something like, nothing, because that's not my job. My job's to run the Competition and Markets Authority. And shortly after, that person left that role. Contrast that with how the FCA has responded to the government's request for assistance with the growth agenda. It's been quite a different sort of response. And it's only a few years ago, when Andrew Bailey, when he was the chief executive of the FCA, it's only a few years ago when he was basically saying, as a matter of principle, a regulator should not be involved in promoting the industry that it's regulating. It creates an obvious conflict of interest. The phrase used at the time was about becoming a cheerleader for the city. So the deregulatory agenda really does concern us. The unholy trinity, what a lovely phrase. You can use it for so many different things. In this context, what I'm referring to as the unholy trinity is three fundamental big picture root cause issues. The revolving door problem. When you get the slide, you'll see that revolving door problem, those words are hyperlinked. They're hyperlinked to an article that was in the Times yesterday about a senior FCA person who previously in her senior FCA role was actually helping to regulate the car finance industry. That person has now taken on the role in a consultancy firm that has clients that include the companies in the car finance industry. And I think the trade body of the car finance industry. Now, this is a big and complicated issue. The revolving door problem is not an easy one to describe, define, or deal with. It's really challenging. But what I do know in Europe, because I was involved with it, helping it to happen, is there was a great piece of thought leadership about the idea that, for example, there ought to be a minimum time period from when somebody may be at one point in time regulating a particular industry or company or sector, and then taking on a senior influential role. The revolving door problem has got many facets to it. One of them, of course, is that if people are joining a regulator because they believe that doing so will multiply their career earnings potential, when they then go and work for a regulated entity, how do we know that they're going to be necessarily tough with the company or the sector they're regulating if in the back of their mind they're hoping to get a job in that industry or even that company at some future point in time? All kinds of issues involved with the revolving door problem. Revolving door problem obviously results in conflicts of interest, and in extreme, that can be regulatory capture. Dr. Andy Schmulo, who we know very well, an Australian legal academic who really knows his way around regulation from an international perspective, he talks about how regulatory capture was first sort of understood and studied from an academic point of view. He talks about the reasons why the financial sector is very, very prone to regulatory capture. It's a big problem. It's a big, big problem. It's an issue that we talk about. When I say we, I mean the APPG in that context, talks about on page 256 of the report about the FCA that the APPG wrote about. Another big problem, the fraud problem. 40% of all crime in the UK relates to fraud, and of course, a lot of that does involve the financial sector. What I mean by the financial sector in this context is both the regulated bit of it, which is huge, and also the unregulated bit of it, which is also huge. And I think it's fair to say that many stakeholders are of the view that the UK's approach to dealing with financial crime has been pretty shambolic. And depending on who you do, it's an issue that could go and be traced all the way back to our colonial past, where because of our colonial history, the overseas entities became tax havens. Those tax havens became mechanisms whereby dirty money was washed around the world's economy, and much of that flowed into the City of London. The City of London is recognised as a world capital of illicit money problems, money flows. And of course, if you then start to take into account the inverted commas professionals that enable and facilitate legally the companies involved in that illegal activity, if you get my drift, you can see how you then end up with all kinds of vested interests at play. It's a big topic. The APPG held a highly successful summit about the fraud problem back in October, and we've got another one relating to this general topic of fraud next week in Parliament on Monday. Big topic. It's a big issue. A lot of people being hurt as a consequence of it. The poverty of the commons. This phrase is an attempt to describe the idea that if many people are harmed by something, let's say the XYZ financial scandal, it's really difficult to organise such that everybody involved in that harmed community participates in an attempt to get recovery. So you have the free rider problem, people who may get a benefit without being involved, and that discourages other people from being involved as well. And if that involves a bank, if there's a bank entity involved, there's obviously the risk of the consequences of the implicit state guarantee. Generally speaking, and I'm making a generalization here, generally speaking, regulators tend to side with the industry. That's my observation anyway, and not just mine, but others too. Whether they do so because of the revolving door or conflict of interest or regulatory capture, unholy trinity, as I've described, or through groupthink or political pressure, or because they are genuinely concerned that if they bring down a bank because of its malpractice, it may cause contagion risks, systemic risk, and they may be very concerned about that. So there is a predisposition, we think, for the industry to be given an easy ride by regulators much of the time. The over-dependence on over-financialisation. Mark Bishop explained this to me really, really well. I think I do completely understand it now. Most countries have a primary economy. In Australia, it's extraction of minerals, it's mining. And the mining industry in Australia, because it's such a hugely important part of its economy, is a very, very dominant force. So it's really difficult to reform the mining industry in Australia because they are wading in money, they're very powerful, they've got lobbyists everywhere, and the collective influence is massive. Of course, exactly the same applies to the UK with our financial sector. The City of London, the City of London Corporation, our history as an economy going back hundreds and hundreds of years, the way the finance sector advertises impacts our media, the way the financial sector gives donations to political parties impacts our politics, so on, so forth, so on, so forth. About a year ago, maybe a bit longer, there were articles in the press about how an individual who's now a member of the front bench was given, I think, one or maybe two secondees from a bank. Sounds pretty innocent, but what was the agenda behind the bank that provided free secondees to that member of parliament who's now a member of the front bench? I'm simply making the point that if powerful industries want to influence government, they can. If they want to influence regulations, they can. And in the UK, we do have a huge over dependence on the financial sector, which is pretty worrying. So just to recap, I've gone through a long list of some of the issues. These issues are real. These issues cause detriment. These issues cause weak and lax regulation and enforcement. And in extremis, these issues we know for a fact cause people to take their own lives. And if you were to read the document we produced a few years ago called Faces of Financial Crime, you can read 22 case studies of individuals who have been seriously scarred by their interactions with the financial sector and the poor mechanisms for getting redress and justice after that's happened to them. In terms of key developments, without a doubt, perhaps the best thing we've ever done has been to be involved with the ideas that led to the creation of what is now known as the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Investment Fraud and Fairer Financial Services. We are proud to have been involved in writing the APPG's purpose statement. I'll read it out. To advocate for the victims of financial misconduct, crimes, scandals, frauds, and regulatory failures by driving positive, progressive, and purposeful reforms that achieve a fair, trusted, and just system where the service providers, regulators, and government agencies provide appropriate protection and deliver good outcomes, including redress for historical wrongs. Every word in that purpose statement carries real meaning to it. A lot of thought went into writing that purpose statement, and it really does represent the vision that the APPG is on the side of the consumer, speaking up for the consumer. The consumer's voice is so easily drowned out. The consumer's voice tends to be very fragmented, very quiet, very disorganized. This APPG's purpose is quite literally to try to speak up for the consumer interest, not just in relation to how the consumer is treated by the industry, by the market participants, by the regulated companies, but also by what Paul Carlier calls the hierarchy of oversight, which of course includes things like the Treasury Committee, the FCA, and so on. The bottom of the slide takes you to the link, takes you to the APPG report and the truly phenomenal media coverage that it gathered. We're really very proud of that work and so grateful to everybody that got involved. Off the back of the report, there's now a supplementary report being produced. Every now and then, a new edition will be written, which will include a new case study about the FCA's work. And as I've explained earlier, I'll recap it now for those of you who joined a bit later. It's led to the survey, Make Your Voice Heard questionnaire to gather public opinions on the FCA, which if you've downloaded that spreadsheet from the chat that I uploaded earlier, you'll see there's a lot of commentary and a lot of analysis. It really is helping to inform the APPG's thinking about the FCA. In addition to all this, we've been instrumental in getting 3 parliamentary inquiries open. We're really proud of that. Every time we did it, it took a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of campaigning, a lot of networking, a lot of asking, a lot of please, can you help with this kind of conversations. 2 parliamentary inquiries conducted by the Work and Pension Select Committee. We're very proud of both of those. And the first one was about the need for greater transparency in relation to pension costs and asset management costs and charges. That topic, costs and charges in pensions and investments, was really the first topic that got the TTF going. The other one was about pension scams. We're very close to that topic too. And the third inquiry was by the Treasury Select Committee in relation to SME finance, which we campaigned so hard for. And we were so pleased that that inquiry was open. But there's a lot more I could say about that than I've got time to go into right now. But I will say we will continue to campaign for truth and justice for people who've been harmed by banks in relation to things like interest rate hedging, product mis-selling, the sorts of things that John Swift Casey's report was meant to all be about. Sub-brands. What I mean by sub-brands are names we come up for particular things that kind of stick, so we use them. The Rally for Better Financial Regulation, that was a march in London. Oh, no, we've done two of that brand. The Enough is Enough March for Justice in London, that was filmed. We ended up on GB News. And the footage is hopefully still going to end up getting used in a documentary that we believe is still being worked on. The International League of Ethical Financial Services Leaders and the Woodford Campaign Group, which has got about 600 people in it. These are the sub-brands that we've developed along the way. The RSA, some of you will know the RSA. I'm a fellow of the RSA, very proud to be a fellow of the RSA. I became a fellow of the RSA when Matthew, the chief executive of the organisation, came to a couple of TTF meetings and spoke. He let me persuade him to come along and speak. It was a real achievement at the time. At the time, TTF was like, very, very small and frankly very insignificant, but he did. Matthew Taylor came along and spoke. We got on very well. That led to me becoming a fellow, and I'm very proud that the Transparency Task Force then founded within the RSA the Responsible Finance for Good network. And as the slide says, the RSA is a global network. It's about 25,000 people, I think. It's huge. A global network of change makers, enabling people, places, and the planet to flourish in harmony. That's its strapline. Really pleased about that. Violation tracker. I've already touched on this. I've already explained that it's data, hard, verifiable data from official sources, for example, the Financial Conduct Authority, that shows which companies have broken rules and how much they've been fined. And as I've already explained, it shows the irrefutable evidence of widespread recidivism in the sector. Item C there, I'll just read it out. The ineffectiveness of the existing regulatory framework to drive out the underlying causes of poor conduct, which is the root cause of that recidivism. I'd like to just briefly go off on a bit of a tangent here. When the global financial crisis happened, it affected my family because my dad he's passed away now, was Greek Cypriot. He worked hard his life and retired to Cyprus. And like a lot of Greek Cypriots, he put his money in the Bank of Cyprus. And some of you will already be aware that the Greek economy, the Cypriot economy, was particularly badly hit for all kinds of reasons by the global financial crisis. It meant that the comfortable retirement that my dad worked hard for didn't happen. And this was all at around the same time as we were getting Transparency Task Force up and running. And it was painful for my dad to have to completely rethink his expectations about what his old age was going to be like. So my dad was impacted. Many, many people were impacted. In fact, 10,000 people around the world were impacted so badly by the global financial crisis that they took their own lives. And that figure of 10,000 isn't a figure I've made up. It's from Oxford University. And by the way, it's not the whole world. That's actually just the UK, Canada, mainland Europe, and the USA. The point I'm making is that perhaps more than any other industry, the financial services sector has the capability of causing profound harm to economic stability, political stability, people's financial security. It has the ability to cause huge harm as well as the ability to cause great security and great well-being. I mention this in the context of Violation Tracking UK because Mark Carney, at the time governor of the Bank of England, etc., he talked about the single biggest learning from the global financial crisis was the lack of personal accountability. He was basically saying all this stuff went horribly wrong, but there was nobody they could blame for it, a lack of personal accountability. And that reality, that realization led to the development of the senior managers certification regime, the idea that people who had senior roles in banks, etc., were accountable for the consequences of their actions. And that was the senior manager certification regime. But the power of the City of London and the forces that lobby for the industry have no doubt played a part in the dilution of the senior manager certification regime. So the primary regulatory response to the global financial crisis was the senior manager certification regime, and it's now being unwound bit by bit, bit by bit, bit by bit. My point being that when a company misbehaves, if all that happens is the company is fined, we know that the people paying that fine at the end of the day are the shareholders of the company, which ironically might be us. We may own bits of that company through our shareholdings and our pension funds and all the rest of it. If there is a lack of personal accountability, it won't change behavior. All the data seems to be suggesting that, and that's loud and clear if you study the contents of Violation Tracking UK. Transparency Task Force, I'm very, very proud to say, has a wonderful advisory group. It includes, as the slide shows, folks like John Howard, who I think is with us tonight. John's a former chair of the FCA's consumer panel, a former presenter of BBC You and Yours for, I think, 14 years. Great guy. So proud to have John as the person running our advisory group, which a group that's there to provide challenge and direction and governance to TTF. In other words, to keep me on the straight and narrow. They do succeed sometimes. But also members of that group include folks like the UK lead for United Nations Global Compact, a wonderful guy called Steve Kenzie, and Lou Baxter Scott, who, amongst other things, is trading standards for lead on fraud. And she does a huge amount of work in the consumer protection space. What else? Our understanding of key entities. I think it's fair to say that Transparency Task Force has probably got, collectively, I don't mean me personally, but collectively, an unrivaled understanding of the inner workings of key organizations. The Financial Conduct Authority, the Financial Conduct Authority's Financial Services Consumer Panel, the Treasury, bits of the Treasury, and the Treasury Select Committee, and the Financial Ombudsman Service. Because of the lived experience we've had over the last 10 years or so, we've ended up getting to know those organizations really well. And what's interesting about it is the interconnection between them. If you like, the hidden wiring that connects these organizations. And I would say, I can't prove this, but I would say means that they're not nearly as independent of each other as they ought to be. And perhaps a very good example of that, as the slide says, is the recent attempts by the Treasury to get involved with, some might say interfere with, the judicial process regarding the car finance scandal, where essentially what the Treasury was trying to do was stand up for the banks against the consumers in plain English. Again, I'm oversimplifying to the nth degree, but that was the gist of it. So you then wonder, well, who's helping who here? Who are the goodies? Who are the baddies? Who's on which side? It's an interesting question to pose. Our events program, you all know about that. Most of it's online these days, but we do run events in person from time to time. We've gotten to know parliamentary processes particularly well, things like how to campaign for a backbench debate, things like how to get involved with amendments to bills working their way through Parliament, etc. There's a great big section in the slide all about supporting victims. I'm going to cut through this very quickly. Because of TTF's growth and evolution and the lived experience of many of our members, we have sadly ended up getting to know hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who have, in one way or another, been let down by the financial system or the regulatory framework that's meant to be governing it. And we know that the system doesn't look after them very well at all. And we know that we are trying to do all we can to help them in various different ways. No time to go into all the detail around that now. But it's fair to say that it is really easy to come to the simple conclusion that there's a high chance that if somebody is mistreated by the financial industry, whether that's a regulated firm or an unregulated firm, they probably won't get the justice and the treatment they deserve. We think that's wrong, and we're doing what we can to speak up for them. I'll move on. Wherever we can, we collaborate with other organisations. We're very proud to be associate members of Better Finance, the pan-European pro-consumer group, and also the Transforming Finance Network, which is made up of about 20 or so UK-based organisations. Court cases. We've been involved with 2 court cases, one directly, one indirectly, and we've also been involved with a very important employment tribunal. We were indirectly involved with another APPG's judicial review against the FCA. Many of you will know about that. We were involved in technical terms as well as in terms of crowdfunding the 100K for the lawyers to do the work that they did. We were directly involved in the High Court case regarding the Woodford investment scandal through the pro bono support we got from Hock Chan and Damon Falkowski. Hock being a retired lawyer and Damon being a barrister, who did an absolutely sterling job promoting the interest of the victims in court. And right now, we're waiting for the decision in relation to a very important employment tribunal. Important because, according to the Telegraph headline, the gist of the case was senior FCA employee whistle blew in relation to various things going on inside the FCA that he was unhappy about. And a little while later, he was sacked. The narrative is the question, was he sacked because he was making a noise about stuff going on inside the FCA? Well, I don't actually know. As a matter of fact, the answer to that question, and none of us do, we won't know until the judge makes a decision. And hopefully within the next week or so, that decision will be made. But if it does transpire that the evidence suggests that the FCA sacked somebody for blowing the whistle, then that would be rather interesting, wouldn't it? Summits in Parliament, we've run 2 so far. One was on transparency that I had the privilege of co-chairing with Tom Tugendat, MDE MP. That was a few years ago. There was one in October last year about fraud that I co-chaired with Bob Blackman, the co-chair of the APPG. We've got one on Monday where the Victims Commissioner, Baroness Newlove of Warrington, is going to be speaking. And we've got one planned for October to do with the challenges of dealing with organisations that are arm's length bodies with too much power and not enough accountability. We've published our book about rebuilding trust and confidence in financial services. There's some notes here about the consequences of a lack of trust in financial services, which I won't go into in much detail right now, but I will say that for the financial services industry to be trustworthy, it needs to behave in a for it to be trusted, it needs to behave in a trustworthy way. It doesn't at the moment. All kinds of important evidence points to that, including what's called the Edelman Trust Barometer. That needs to be fixed, and that needs to be fixed fast, because all the time you have an industry that's not trusted, people aren't using it, which manifests in people being underinsured, undersaving for retirement, not putting money away for a rainy day, etc. We do lots of consultations. We have a wonderful international network of ambassadors. in 20 countries around the world. What an unbelievably potent force collectively. What a fantastic resource in terms of subject matter expertise, including folks like Nicholas Morris and Sue Jaffa, who are here tonight with us, based in Melbourne. We've got Eric Smith in the US with us tonight. I think we've got Eddie Toohig in Canada and various other members of our international community. Please note, all of the above and much, 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 much more has been done on an absolute shoestring. We are living pretty much hand to mouth. Most months, I worry about how we're going to pay the bills, including the wages. We always somehow do it. And whenever it gets really, really tough, I send out one of my emails that says, please, please, please give us some money if you can. And thank goodness, so far, that's always just about happened in the nick of time. You would not believe how close we come to having to close up shop, for want of a better phrase, on numerous occasions. Can I please thank everybody that has ever supported TTF financially. Please never underestimate the importance of your help to the work that we do. When we come back to strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, please let's make sure we revisit that, because I am absolutely sure we could and should be doing a much better job strategically in terms of our funding. Key shifts in our thinking. I could have beaten about the bush here, but I thought, no, I'm not going to bother. We have evolved from being an industry-centric pro-consumer organisation. What does that mean? That means that when TTF started, every member was somebody either in the industry or connected to it. When I look at the list of attendees at the first 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings, virtually 100% of all the attendees were people I knew from the industry because I've spent my life working in it. So we've gone from an industry-centric pro-consumer organisation to a consumer-centric pro-consumer organisation. It's fascinating to know, and this is probably down to me being network relationship management more than anything else, but it's fascinating to know that not one person that attended the inaugural meeting of Transparency Task Force is an active member of our community now. All the industry people have, almost all the industry people have moved away. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. The other key shift in our thinking is when I started Transparency Task Force, my view was that the FCA was a big part of the solution. I'm now pretty sure that the FCA is a big part of the problem. And when I say a big part of the problem, I mean, speaking frankly, that I believe the Financial Conduct Authority has the capacity to act in bad faith and to not do what it's supposed to do. And sometimes the FCA does things that make me wonder if it's so riddled with conflicts of interest and so riddled with issues around the revolving door problem and the conflicts of interest issue and regulatory capture that it's kind of corrupted. Corrupt with a small c. I'm not talking here about people being handed money in brown envelopes. I'm not talking about that kind of corruption. I'm talking corruption of the organization's purpose, corruption of what it's there to do, which leads me to this wonderful Robert F. Kennedy quotation. Every time we turn our heads the other way, when we see the law flouted, when we tolerate what we know to be wrong, when we close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened, when we fail to speak up and speak out, we strike a blow against freedom and decency and justice. And give some thought, folks, to Ahmet Latif, the chap who's got that employment tribunal battle with the FCA going on. I think I'm right in saying that the FCA sent in, I think it was 14 or 15 people up against him in the tribunal. He did an absolutely superb job. So proud to see how well he handled himself with such dignity, standing up for truth and justice and refusing to allow himself to be squashed by what he would perceive to be a misbehaving organization. And of course, there have been many, many other whistleblowers who paid a big price of paid a big price for blowing the whistle. What about TTF's future? There's a long list of stuff we want to carry on doing. I won't go into any of this in any detail, but there's a list there of the kind of things that would make a transformational difference to the workings of the UK's financial sector, and if any of it caught on elsewhere, to the financial industry around the world. The idea of a financial services consumer protection alliance, which is about bringing all the pro-consumer organisations together. The idea of statutory independent tribunals for people to get justice in a low risk and low cost way. The idea of a financial regulator supervisory council, a duty of care, removing the FCA's immunity from civil liability, dealing with the unholy trinity, i.e. revolving door conflicts of interest and regulatory capture, and looking at what happens globally around regulation and financial services conduct, auditing which countries are doing what really well, what ideas can we bring into the UK. There's a long list of things there. There's a long list of other things that aren't even on the slide that we would like to go on to do. My point is this, ladies and gentlemen. We've done a lot of work in the last 10 years on a shoestring, and there's a lot more to be done. A lot more to be done. More there too. The last point I'll dwell on, when the global financial crisis, Canada, the USA, and Europe responded by creating state-funded entities that were specifically designed to stand up for consumers. That didn't happen in the UK, but there's a lot we can learn from them. Better Finance is a very good organisation sticking up for consumers. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, until a couple of months ago, was a very, very good US entity. Those of you who keep up with the American press will know that that organisation is being dismantled right now because the current government has a different view about the importance of regulators. The current government in the US I'm talking about. If you Google recent history around the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, you'll realize it's significantly under threat. And Canada created Fair Canada. And what's interesting about those organizations, and what this slide is an attempt to explain, what's interesting is that they are part of the system. What that means is they don't have to spend huge amounts of energy getting to talk to the rest of the system because they're a part of it. Whereas Transparency Task Force spends a huge amount of energy and time trying to break through to have the right conversations with the right people, both directly and through the APPG. Those organizations, because they are part of the ecosystem, don't have that disadvantage. They do have other challenges. How do you stop a state-funded entity going rogue and becoming just a quango? How do you stop that from happening? But I'm just pointing out the inherent advantages of organizations like Better Finance, Fair Canada, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Folks, what we're going to do now is break. You've all been very, very, very kind listening to me witter on. I've just tried to condense 10 years into an hour or so. It's been difficult to do that, but I hope you've all got a feel for what TTF is, what we've been doing, what we've managed to achieve in the past, and what we hope to achieve in the future. There's that lovely Clint Eastwood quote. I forget which film it is. Was it Dirty Harry? It might be Dirty Harry. It's the one that says something like, a man's going to know his limitations. And in all honesty, my short list of strengths, talking to me personally here, my very, very short list of strengths includes the realization that I've got many, many limitations. And because I know I've got many limitations, I naturally find myself wanting to harness the goodwill and energy and intelligence and strengths of other people. And in so many ways, ladies and gentlemen, Transparency Task Force is my attempt to bring us all together and to get us focused on particular stuff. You'll know at the beginning of the conversation, for those of you that joined at about 6 o'clock or shortly after, I talked about the idea of let's talk about our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and strengths. Could I please invite you to do this for me? I've not been looking at what's in the chat because I've been focused on my slides. So forgive me. I'll get through that as quickly as I possibly can. But can I please invite everybody to go to that piece of paper you grabbed hold of earlier, or that notepad you used, or whatever it might be, your iPad or your phone, and please whack into the chat. Please put into the chat what you think when I ask you the question, what, if any, do you think are TTF strengths? We won't be able to kind of analyze this in any real detail, but I just basically want you to populate the chat with whatever comes to your mind when I ask you the question, what do you think are TTF strengths, if any? You genuinely may feel we have none at all, in which case, obviously, don't answer the question. But there's 46 people in this meeting, including me. I'd love to think we can get a few dozen comments in there about what you think TTF strengths are. And I'm going to go quiet for a minute or so while we turn our attention to that particular point. And then guess what? We're going to go on to weaknesses, then opportunities, then threats. And this is a great chance for me to get inside your heads and see things how you see them and learn from them. Robert, I can see your hands up. I'll come back to you later when we have the Q&A bit. I want to kind of stick in a reasonably structured way at the moment, Chuck, if that's okay. Nice to see you this evening. Thank you. I'll come back to you later on, okay? I do need to keep this reasonably structured, or we're going to be at risk of going over time, and I don't want to do that. I'm looking for us to finish in roughly 20 minutes or so. There are some very, very nice comments going in the chat. So please carry on writing what you perceive are strengths in the chat. That would be very, very helpful. Just a few words would be great. And perhaps more importantly, what about our weaknesses? This is hyper important to me, right? In the space of a minute, you can probably give me thousands of pounds worth of market research intel when it comes to your assessment of our weaknesses. You may only tell me things I already know, in which case it's good to have that point reaffirmed. Equally, you may tell me things I've never ever thought of before. So please don't hold back. Please don't hold back. Like anybody, constructive criticism can sometimes be tough to take, but to excuse the cheesiness of it. But feedback is the mother and father of performance. You learn from your mistakes. You learn from feedback that people give you. So don't worry about upsetting me when you outline our weaknesses. In fact, to be honest with you folks, I can probably write a longer list of my weaknesses than any of you can about any of yours. What are our weaknesses? What are our weaknesses? Now, if for any reason you don't want to do this in a public forum, in other words, where your comments can be seen by others, feel free to pop me an email. You've all got my email address. Just send me an email. We want to absorb all this, okay? We want to absorb all this. We might do a word cloud thing to try to create a visual from it. And myself and the team, Alexandra, Chelsea, folks like Mark Bishop and others, can kind of spend some time looking at the feedback and say, actually, that's an important point. We need to do a bit more about that, or that's good to know, or whatever it might be. Next is opportunities. So what do you see as our opportunities, if any? You may not see us having any opportunities at all. I've misspelled it. Well, I think I can actually edit it. Allow me to edit that. Oh, yes, I can. I nearly deleted it. Opportunities. It's just a time. I only learned recently you can edit what you put in the chat. What are our opportunities? And of course, the last one is threats. What are our threats? And having done this bit, I'm going to move on through a few slides and then we'll be opening the conversation right up. Oh, I've misspelled that as well. I'm rushing on. Not feats, threats. What are strengths, opportunities? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Thank you. Please do carry on doing that. Please do carry on doing that. And if, for example, you've just remembered a weakness and you want to go back to it, just put in weakness, then, you know, whatever words you want to put down there. Let's go back to the slides because I can quickly finish my bit and then pass the conversation basically over to you guys and girls. There are some strength, weakness, opportunities, threats I looked at earlier myself, which we'll ignore. And we now get to this bit, which is comments and questions, please. That's the most important slide. I'm happy to go on beyond 7:30 UK time if other people want to stay. But of course, if for any reason you want to leave at the 7:30 UK time, then feel free to do so. But I would be really, really pleased to continue to chat with folks that want to stay. So, comments and questions, please. Mr. Martin White has got his hand up. Martin, I'm going to first of all go to Chuck Hodgkinson, who had his hand up a little bit earlier. I know you won't mind that. Robert, also known as Chuck, please do share your thoughts, please. You wanted to make a point earlier, and I said, hold on there for a minute. So, Robert, are you still there? And if so, please take yourself off mute and whatever thought you'd like to. Hi, Chuck. Go for it. Thank you very much.
Well, just scribbled a few points. Our strengths, we've got Andy, Alex, and Chelsea. And underneath that, people. I mean, for instance, Mark Bishop has been instrumental in giving us some wonderful advice that we took, and we're very grateful for the membership and the people that come on these meetings with their ideas and good thoughts. Just one thing that you mentioned as you went through. You mentioned a gentleman called Mark Carney. Yes. He used to be the running the Bank of England. Question for anybody that might know. We heard on the press that £50 billion had gone missing while that chap was in charge of it all, but we never heard, perhaps it's been on the press, but we've missed it. We don't know what happened to the 50 billion. I wonder if any of the other guys might know. Anyway, Robert, congratulations, Andy. Congratulations on all these years, and that's what Laurie makes it.
Thank you very, very much. It's very, very kind of you to say that. I'm just putting a note in the chat about Mark Bishop because you're absolutely right to draw attention to Mark. He's an enormous asset to the cause, and the volunteers within the TTF community are fantastic. Robert, I'm going to not answer your question. There we go, because I don't want to distract us from the main focus of tonight's conversation. Okay, so I'll come back to it later. If you ping me an email with that question, I promise I will deal with it, but not tonight because I'm going to be very, very focused and unusually disciplined. Thank you, Robert. We're going to go to we're going to go to Martin White next and then to Anthony Stansfeld. Martin White.
Thank you, Energy. We all are totally aghast at your sorry, thank you, Andy. We're totally aghast at the amount of energy you're able to bring to it. And I happen to know the amount of preparation you must do just for events like this is amazing. So your work rate is just astounding. You mentioned that when we started the Transparency Task Force, they were industry people. I had a look at the book that was mentioned this morning, actually, about trust, and I looked at the people contributing and the what each of them was supposed to be saying, and I thought, I'm not going to want to read this. This is going to be a load of self-serving rubbish. There's very few genuinely consumer people taking part of it, so I'm not at all surprised by what you say, but I still think there are some people who are part of the financial sector in one way or the other that are even here today and they genuinely want to help. So I don't want to be 200% about it.
Yeah.
The other thing is at a slide you just showed about what to be done, I think there is scope for consumers to work together a little bit more proactively, as you know, and
Yeah.
I'll talk to you about how we might do a little bit more on that going forward. It will help publicity for both you and me.
Well, thank you very much, Dave. You've got me. You've got me. I'm hooked onto that, Martin. You've got me intrigued. Thank you very much. You know what? Speaking very honestly, I think in the early days of Transparency Task Force, there were a lot of people who gravitated towards it from the industry because it was good to be seen to be supporting the concept of transparency. But as TTF became more and more progressive and more challenging of the industry, and as we became more challenging of the industry regulators, I think more and more people found themselves feeling uncomfortable about being directly involved with TTF, not because they weren't comfortable with what we were doing, but because they were uncomfortable about being seen to be associated with it because of the conflict of interest around being loyal to their organization, being subservient to the regulator. It's a complex dynamic. I wish I knew the answer to that. But Martin, thank you for your support. Mr. Anthony Stansfield, to you, sir. Thank you. Then we're going to go to Anne-Marie Board. Bonjour, Anne-Marie. Anthony.
Andy, it's said 10 years ago, I think I'd been trying to get somebody to take an interest about a year and a half beforehand when we got the HBOS Reading cases going. And I looked around me and there were all these regulatory authorities that should be supporting us. There shouldn't be any need for a transparency task force at all. The sheer amount of money that is spent on all these regulatory authorities, and they seem to achieve very little. They certainly don't achieve their main aims, which is to stop fraud. And we can go straight through them. From the Financial Conduct Authority, the National Crime Agency, the Prudential Regulatory Authority from the Bank of England, the SRA, the SFO, and the Met and the City of London Police, and our politicians. And absolutely nobody is doing the job properly. And so it's left to you and the Transparency Task Force and Alex. And it is a vast area to cover. And really, I'm absolutely amazed that you're able to do as much as you are. So a huge thank you. But you do need financial backup properly. And I think this is the essential thing. And I think the key is going to be to get the financial backup without regulatory capture.
Yeah.
And you need help. You need other people to work with you on this. And I think, we've got to move to that. It is too big a job, really, for you in the Transparency Task Force in its present form to do entirely by yourselves. And I think you're doing a fantastic job, I have to say. But it is too big a job for such a small organization. Thank you.
Yeah. Anthony, you are absolutely spot on. You're absolutely so spot on. We are effectively like a grain of sand on the beach, right? We really are tiny, puny, insignificant compared to the size of the challenge. Even organizations like Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in America, Better Finance in Europe, Fair Canada in Canada, even organizations like that struggle, and they've got great big, budgets, state funded. Even organizations like that struggle to deal with the status quo and the vested interests. So I absolutely buy into what you're saying. That's why I think the idea of TTF developing some kind of charitable dimension where we might get funding from somewhere is definitely the way for us to go. That's why the transition from caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly must happen. We cannot survive if we say as caterpillar. Frankly, I'm just going to keel over if we carry on like this, right? And I don't want to. I don't want to. Just put that on the record. But if we continue to grow in the right way, all kinds of things become possible. Thank you so much, Anthony, for your sentiment and your support. Folks, for those of you that don't know Anthony, there are people here from Kentucky, from Melbourne, from Nova Scotia, etc., etc., etc. Anthony was the Thames Valley Police Crime Commissioner who played a absolutely central role in getting the criminal bankers locked up. He's a superstar in our world. Thank you, Anthony. Anne-Marie Bourg. Bonjour, Anne-Marie Bourg. Comment allez-vous?
Bonjour, and my apologies for my lateness. It's a bit hectic around here. But just to respond to your idea of keeling over, I want you to know we are not going to let you keel over. We are all there supporting you, backing you, believing in the team, believing in this task force without any hesitation whatsoever. And the only thing that I would say is that there is a reality in what we actually live at the moment. And the reality is that you are a force for change, but that change takes time. And it is what I mean by cathedral thinking. You are building the foundation of something extremely important, which is going to be the future of our children. It is the future of our society. It is so, so important, and never, never lose faith in that, because we don't, and we are there for you as much as we can all the time, without any hesitation. It's just fantastic what you're doing. That's all I wanted to say. So,
I really wasn't expecting this. I really, 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 really was not expecting this. I'm so flattered by the lovely comments you made. Anne-Marie, half the problem I've got is I'm rubbish at saying no to stuff. I wrote in the phrase, many of you will know the former mayor of the City of London. I forgot his name, can't believe it. Anyway, he said to me, Andy, you're doing great stuff. You need to do less but better. The idea of doing less but better. I do too many things and I need to curtail that and focus on fewer things. That would be a great strategy for the not keel over idea.
The only thing I would also talk about would be very briefly is the education side of things. If we are building for the future, I think we need also to invest somewhere along the line, and please lean on me for that. You know how strong I am with thinking about education. The education system is so important. This is the future. If we can actually put something in there, some grains of knowledge in the education system to help for the future, I think that's really important as well.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for everything.
You're most welcome. Okay. Would anybody else like to come in with any comments or questions? Please balance this out a little bit. We've had a few fans very kindly say some very nice things. Would anybody feel, go for it. Somebody come forward and say, Andy, you may be good at this, this, and this, but you're absolutely rubbish at that, or TTF needs to do this. I'm absolutely up for a bit of like straight between the eyes feedback on stuff we need to do better or differently, or stop doing or start doing. I'm going to, if nobody wants to do that, I'm going to pick on some folks to come with some thoughts. Yes, Mark Bishop. Yes, sir. Mark.
Andy, okay, so I'm not going to criticise at all. Instead, I'm going to quote that guy whose name I've forgotten. You know, the founder of Apple. What's his name? He died.
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. Thank you. Steve Jobs. He was giving a speech to a bunch of graduates, I think, at Stanford University. And he made a really interesting point, which is we human beings think we are the apex species of this planet. But we don't often know on what basis we make that judgment, because there are many things at which we're not the best. And he gave an example, which is the human body is relatively inefficient in that we are not capable of flying and we're not capable of traveling over ground very fast. And yet, we've invented the bicycle, and then the car, and then the aircraft, and then the space travel. So in fact, we managed to go faster over land, and we managed to fly faster than any animal that has ever been. And we did that because of our ability to harness the things that are around us. And in a way, the thing with TTF is we do our thing brilliantly, but do we harness and leverage all of the things around us in the world to do those things? And one of the things I know we're talking about, and which hopefully will be an area of kind of growth for TTF, is working with other organizations.
Yeah.
You know, so we almost feed bullets to big organizations, and people got profiles. So Martin Lewis says something on the telly, it's a thing that we whispered to him over lunch, you know, or maybe something like, you know, which starts a campaign. We suggested the campaign. So people who have platforms that we don't achieve things, we may or may not get the credit for them, but change happens as a result. And I personally think that's the only way forward, because, you know, just like human beings are not, in some respects, the apex species in any one area, except for one, you know, we are the apex species in adapting the environment to us. And I kind of think that's the thing that will get us where we're going. It will take some resources, it will take some time, but ultimately we should be judged by the change that happens, not necessarily by what we did. And if we can get other people to do things, great.
Mark, thank you. As is so often the case, you come up with wonderful insights. You've explained that thought to me before, and it's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Mark, if we have time later, you know, is it 4 whys or 5 whys? Could you briefly cover that off for me? Not
Yeah,
right now. In like maybe 2 or 3 minutes or so. But if you don't mind doing that, because I was thinking about that after our meeting earlier today, and it's such a brilliant way of getting to what really matters. So if you could cover that for me in a few minutes, Mark, that would be brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to come in with any other observations, ideas, criticisms? So there's some work going on that I'm really proud of. Oh, I saw a hand go up there, but I didn't see who it was. It's Ed in Nova Scotia. Ed, hello, Ed. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, it is Nova Scotia, isn't it, Ed? Yeah?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Ed. Please do fire away. And I love your jumper. Gorgeous jumper.
Good. You had a comment or a quote of Robert Kennedy on there. He made another quote that is one of my favorites, that probably the second half was about you. Robert Kennedy said, there are those who see things as they are and ask why. And then there are those who see things as they wish they were and say, why not? That's you.
You're very kind to say that, Ed. I really wasn't expecting this, folks. I really wasn't expecting this, folks. It's very kind of you to say such a nice thing, Ed. But let me tell you this. When you, I'm going to share my screen here. People sometimes talk about work rate and effort and all the rest of it. I don't want to get too kind of upset about this, but basically, many of you will know Ian Davis, the gentleman who took his own life. He basically lost his entire life savings just as he was approaching retirement. And I'll put a link to this in the chat in case you want to read it. What it basically says is he took his own life because he was distraught about losing his life savings, and because of the way that the authorities just didn't take him seriously and didn't take what he was trying to tell them seriously about who the forces were and what they were doing and all the rest of it. And we got involved. We got this what's called an early day motion, and we got a bunch of parliamentarians, as you can see, to co-sign this thing. And I'm mentioning this in the context of what Ed just said, because if ever you have the misfortune of finding yourself going to the funeral of somebody you know and like, who took his own life or her life because of what happened to them, when deep down you know that what happened to them was something that should not have happened to them, it motivates the hell out of you. It really does, Ed. And you literally find yourself saying, this ain't good enough. This isn't right. Let's change it. So, Ed, I'm just trying to respond to what you've said to try to explain why I find myself quite motivated. But having said that, if I tie together your very kind comment, sir, with Clint Eastwood's A Man's Got to Know His Limitations, I have to find ways through your good selves of bringing together your strengths and your abilities with whatever abilities I've got, so that the sum total of our work gets the job done. There is real change needed, and I absolutely know I cannot do anything on my own. I need the rest of you, folks. Would anybody else like to come in? Can I just take a moment to thank particularly those people from overseas, because of the fact that we we don't always have meetings at a decent hour for folks in other parts of the world. Can I please just make a note that we've got Sue Jaffa and Nicholas Morris with us in Melbourne? I'm assuming, Sue and Nicholas, you're at home. I'm not asking you to sort of chip into the conversation. I just want to acknowledge the fact that you're here and that you're wonderful supporters of TTF. Sue, Nicholas, unless you want to say anything, and by the way, while you're
well, as you've singled us out, first of all, we would like to say just how much we admire what you do, and what you have done over the years. And it's very important that you exist. But you are, we haven't got any more of you. And the fact that it is just you is a real problem for TTF. And the fact that TTF is so seriously underfunded. We've discussed this a lot. So we do need to find some way of getting philanthropic funding or something to, and I know you know that. I think the world at this moment is at a turning point, and Trump has moved it that way, and there is a danger that all the things you've been trying to do over the last 10 years become irrelevant because all the institutions start collapsing, and that seems to be what he wants. And in some ways that makes TTF even more important. And in my strengths bit and opportunities, it's come under Sue. I think he is awakening worries in ordinary good people that something really does need to be done to protect the things we care about, and you make a great contribution to that. And that is an opportunity for TTF. So what's happening internationally with Trump it does sort of create a situation that we should be building on.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you very, very, very much indeed. We could spend so much time talking about the points that you just raised. We obviously haven't got the time to do so, but believe me, I've been very actively listening to what you said just now and what you both always said to me. Nicholas, Sue, thank you very much for your help and your support.
And we didn't say we are in fact in the UK now, and we're at the cottage. We've just
I can see you are. Yes, indeed. I know exactly where you are.
Yes. Okay. See you.
I do literally know exactly where you are. That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Great people. Mr. Eric Smith I always get it wrong. It's not Kentucky, is it? Is it Louisiana? Eric, come on yeah, go for it.
I'm actually now in Michigan, but I was born and raised in Kentucky. So you'll hear a little Southern accent from time to time. Haven't been in Michigan. After 20 years, it still hasn't gone away. But, one of the things that, I see from the U.S., there's a lot of changes going on. The institutions, as you pointed out, are huge here versus, the small efforts of consumer protection and all of that. The interesting thing will be to see how a national populist movement shows up with regard to consumer protection. I don't think that the Trump administration will simply side with Wall Street against Main Street here. And in fact, one of the issues is the growing aggregation of power in the lords of Wall Street, BlackRock, Vanguard, the rest of them, which together, BlackRock alone has $10 trillion worth of voting stock in public corporations in the US, and has enough power to individually remove CEOs, boards, to force agendas on public companies that may not be in the best interest of the shareholders or the American public. So one of the things that's of interest to us is directly working against that, the growing power of those. And that comes down to principles, which is the things that we don't have direct control over, which is the debate between active and passive management of investment funds, of ordinary investors. So index funds, ETFs versus actively managed funds has been that debate between active and passive has resulted in those disparate power positions. And we're looking at all of that over here. I recognize that TTF has got to focus on where you are, Andy. you can't be over here worrying about massive things going on in the US market other than spillover into the UK, which there will be a good bit of that. I recognize that we don't have a central organizing position, but I think there are opportunities, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future to grow the organization here, and hopefully revenue from this side of the pond over to TTF headquarters, where it can be of more direct support for you and your efforts, which I've always loved.
Eric, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Thank you very much. There's great ideas there we'll circle back to. Thanks for your input tonight, Eric. Mark Bishop, can we go to you, Mark, for your 4 whys, or is it the 5 whys? And after you've shared your thoughts around that, we'll bring tonight's conversation to a close. Thank you, Mark. Over to you.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to quickly also pick up on what Eric just said. Of course, I'm not an American, but it seems to me as an observer of the States that MAGA is a coalition between, on the one hand, kind of communitarians who are quite interested in the welfare of kind of, mom and pop businesses and unionized labor and people who live a long way away from the coasts, and kind of libertarian tech bros. And the kind of economic libertarians obviously want very different things in terms of financial services regulation than the kind of the provincials, the rubes. And I don't know which is going to predominate. I think here in the UK, you could probably say the same. I mean, for Eric's kind of information, I don't really follow British politics, but we had local elections and a House of Commons by-election last Thursday, some mayoral elections, and Reform UK, which is a kind of, if you like, the populist part of the UK, did better than people expected by some margin. And it probably, if it doesn't form the next government or part of the next government, it will at least be the official opposition of the next general election. And its founder, Nigel Farage, is also subject to these 2 types of influences. One good thing for us is that he was debanked by a large British bank for his political beliefs. So he does understand that banks can act in an arbitrary and anti-consumer fashion. And Andy and I have met with him and spoken with him. He definitely does have a perception that there is a problem with financial regulation in the UK, which is good. But just to really move on to what Andy said, which is that I should talk about 5 whys. The technique 5 whys is a tool within the kind of toolbox of kind of, if you like, lean production, specifically developed by Toyota in the 1950s, the Toyota production system. And the idea is that most people, when they see something that's gone wrong, they immediately identify the cause as being the most obvious form of causation, thing that's in front of them. Whereas instead, they posit that you should act as a 6-year-old child and not just ask why, but when you're given the answer, ask why again. And then to that answer, also ask why, do it 5 times. And that way you will probably get to the underlying cause, and it's the underlying cause that matters. So the immediate cause, for example, which we spend a lot of time with Transparency Task Force, of poor behavior of financial firms is poor regulation. Basically, the regulator lets them get away with it. But actually, you could ask the question, why do we have poor financial regulation? Well, because actually politicians let the regulators get away with it. Why do they allow the regulators to get away with it? Well, because they've been captured by lobbyists and the donor class. Why are they captured by lobbyists and the donor class? And, you're going to go on from there. And, maybe, well, it's not the job of TTF to try to reform the system. what you might say is that actually the underlying reason why the financial services industry behaves as it does is because many of the people at the top of that industry get rich from behaving that way. The negative externalities are shared between consumers on the one hand, and on the other, actually the shareholders in those financial firms, because it's destroying long-term value. Because while it's damaging trust that consumers have in the financial sector, it's therefore damaging the prospects of the financial sector to deliver growth for the shareholders. But shareholder growth doesn't actually matter if you're a chief executive, because you're only in there for 5 years. Cut some costs, buy back some shares, drive up EPS, and your shares vest. You make intergenerational wealth out of that. In 10 years' time, if a load of conduct costs come and bite the firm, or if maybe it just loses customers because actually people don't trust it, doesn't really matter. You won't be there by then. So one of the things which I do think for TTF is another challenge is, as I'm saying, working with other people. Those people should include the industry, because I think there are a lot of honest people in the industry who do realise that there's a problem. It's wrong that only 34% of consumers in the UK trust the majority of the financial services businesses they transact with. Never mind the ones that they don't transact with, and only 28% of them trust the UK's financial regulator. So in a way, it's kind of opposite way to kind of comment toward the end of this session, is that 10 years ago, TTF started off as really being well-wishers of consumers within the industry. And then it became a kind of consumer organisation. And kind of so it should be consumer-centric, but I think it very much needs to harness the well-wishers in the industry in order to achieve its goals.
That will be our next evolution, Mark. And with your help, we have a chance of plotting out a plan to do that. I'm sure we can. May I please end on a real high? I'm a motivated individual. As I touched on earlier when talking about Ian Davis, rest in peace, it's really easy to be motivated when you experience things that make you to want to make change in the world. And if I may, I'll end on a quote I've used many times before. It's the Mark Twain quote. It's the quote that says, the two most important days in a man's life are the day he or she is born and the day he or she discovers why. And for me, that quote is powerful, because today we're talking about today being the 10-year anniversary of TTF, the 10-year birthday of TTF. 6th of May, a day that's of no significance to anybody else in the world, but of great significance to me, because 6th of May 2015 was when we first got together a bunch of people who had good thoughts about making the industry better for the sake of the industry and for the sake of the people it's supposed to serve. I can't quite believe that we've survived this long. I can't quite believe what we've managed to do. There's that Churchill quote, never before has so much been owed to so few. Talk about never before has so much been done with so little. We've really managed to do a lot with very, very little. And we're very, very proud of that. We're very, very proud of that. But the theme for tonight is that our next 10 years cannot be like the last 10 years. We'll self-destruct if we try to make it that way. So somehow we need to harness the ideas that have been shared tonight about moving to a new stage of our development. It might be that our plans to become a charity or to set up a charity as a separate entity all come together. And if that's the case, that may unlock the door to funding, which will then give us the resource that we need. I'm going to end up on another quote. I think it was Hannibal talking about getting through the Alps with his elephants. If we can't find a way, we'll make one. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very, very much indeed. If we can't find a way, we'll make one. May I please take this opportunity to applaud you for the support, the good wishes, the well-being, the technical input, for volunteering, and everything else. I'm going to go and find myself a tin of cider in the fridge. I'm going to drink it, and I'm going to celebrate our 10-year birthday. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you for being with me on the journey. It's much appreciated. Good night all. Good night all. Thank you. Whichever hemisphere you're in. Good night all. Thank you very, very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.